Hello, my friends! Welcome back to my channel. My name is Victoria, and this is Self-Study 101. This is a series where I teach you how to self-study, especially if you are not in school, if you're not a student, and you're trying to study on your own while also working a full-time job. Today I'm going to talk about something I call a study menu. A study menu is pretty much what it sounds like. It's like a menu at a restaurant where you order things to eat, but instead of food, your menu is filled with all sorts of fun activities that you can do for studying. I love study menus, and there's something that you can use for all kinds of projects, not just studying, so they're super applicable and super useful. I'm excited to tell you all about them, how to use them, and how to make the perfect study menu just for you. Now let's get started. Here's a common pattern that I see when people first try to get started with self-studying. So there's some topic that you want to study. Let's say that's French, or coding, or math. So you're like, okay, how could I self-study French? I know, I'll buy a textbook that teaches French. Or I'll find a video series that teaches people how to code. Or I'll find a Coursera course on math. And then I'll just do one chapter a day out of this textbook. Or one video a day out of this series. Or one lecture a day out of this Coursera course. And then I'll just keep doing that every day until I reach the end of the series, and by then, I'll have learned French or coding or math. So that's the plan, but then what actually happens is you get one chapter in, or one video in, or one lecture in, and then you never study again. I know this pattern super well because I have done this so many times myself. In my previous video, I mentioned that I am currently self-studying Korean, and I've been doing that for the last 2.5 years. But before then, I tried and failed to study Korean for about 3 decades. So I actually have way more experience failing to study Korean than I have studying Korean successfully. And in those 3 decades of failure, I would do this over and over again. Tell myself that I just need to study one chapter every day from this textbook, and then I would either never open the textbook at all, or start studying but fall off after like 1 or 2 days max. Every time this happened, I'd be so frustrated with myself. Like, oh, why don't I have more discipline? Why can't I just force myself to sit down and read this textbook and cram this knowledge into my head? I would keep blaming myself and trying to get myself to change instead of thinking, wait a minute, maybe I'm not the problem. Maybe the problem is my approach. And turns out, yes, it was my approach. Here are a few things about myself. I get bored really easily. And I have this pattern of like getting really excited about something at first and then losing interest and wanting to do something different. And generally I need variety to keep me interested and keep me engaged. That means for me, the approach of trying to do the exact same thing every single day, whether it's reading a textbook or anything else, is really, really hard for me. I used to think that because I didn't like repetition, that meant that there was no way I would ever be able to make myself stick to a routine. But then I realized you don't have to do the exact same thing every day to accomplish the same goal every day. As an example, I eat every day, but I don't need to eat the exact same thing in order to eat every day. So what if we tried applying that same thinking to studying? So for me, I had the same goal every day, study Korean, but I decided to give myself a lot more options for what studying Korean looked like. I brainstormed and I researched a bunch of different activities that I could do to study Korean, and I organized them all into a list, and then when I sit down to study, I choose items off my study menu based on what I'm feeling like doing that day. And this approach was so much easier for me to stick to than just trying to sequentially grind through a textbook. So just to be clear, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with learning from a textbook or doing the same thing every day to study. What I'm saying is that that's not the only way to study. And if you find yourself having trouble sticking to a study routine, instead of just assuming that you are a flawed human, take a step back and problem solve a bit. You should design a study routine that works for you instead of trying to force yourself to fit the first study routine you think of, or a study routine that you think should work for you, but in practice is not. So, if you want to try creating a custom study routine that works especially for you, One thing you can try creating is a study menu. So now let me explain what they are, how to make one for yourself, and how to use it. A study menu is just a list of different activities that you can do to study your topic. Whenever you sit down to study, you can consult your study menu, and you can choose whatever activities sound good for you that day. Okay, so you want to create a study menu, and you want to fill it with all sorts of fun activities for studying. But how do you get ideas for what to put on your menu? My biggest advice for you here is to look for activities where fun things are, for whatever fun means to you. So like when I first started trying to figure out how to self-study Korean, at first I treated it like a research project. I was like looking at Google and looking at like literally academic advice for how one acquires new language. And that's definitely useful. But I found my best and my favorite study activities from YouTube and Instagram. You can look for channels that are literally teaching your topic, but I also recommend that you follow accounts that talk about study tips and like tips for studying specifically your topic. Like for language learning, there are all sorts of videos and a huge community around how to study languages. And I've definitely found a lot of fun and useful tips from other Korean learners on these platforms. There are also people who are kind of like study influencers. Let influencers influence you into studying. Even for the accounts that are a little more on the aesthetic side, I find them helpful because they help me keep motivated to keep studying. So YouTube and Instagram work well for me, and I think you should definitely check them out for study ideas. But also use whatever platform you're already on, since you might like those even better. I mentioned variety a few times, that you should have different activities on your study menu. What sort of variety am I talking about? I found it particularly helpful to look for activities that vary in the following ways: duration, difficulty level, and theory versus application. For duration, find activities that you can do in like 1 to 5 minutes, as well as activities that you could spend an hour or longer doing. For difficulty level, try to find activities that challenge you a bit, but also find activities that are like your comfort activities, like exercises that are fun and fluffy and easy, things that you enjoy doing. For theory versus application, by this I mean activities that help you acquire new information, as well as activities that help you practice applying what you've learned. So like learning a new grammar pattern in French is learning a new concept, and then writing sentences that use that grammar pattern is practicing applying the concept. So as you're finding activities to put in your study menu, you can think of activities that vary in these ways. I also wanted to give you a few random tips. The first tip is stock up on easy activities. Especially when you are first starting out, you really want to have a stockpile of activities that you can do even when studying is the last thing you want to do. I specifically suggest that you choose some activities that are technically too easy for you. Like one of my favorite comfort study activities is to actually read this one book called Easy Reading in Korean for Beginners. I am an early advanced Korean speaker, but I love reading this book because I understand everything that it says. And it's not that I can't still learn from it. I can still practice reading, I can still practice fluency and pronunciation. So it ends up just being a really easy and comforting activity that I can do even when I really am not feeling like studying that day. I would also include activities that are multitaskable. Like for me, another great I don't feel like studying study activity is listening to a Talk to Me in Korean podcast. If I'm listening to a podcast, that means I can do something else. So if I'm feeling like restless one day, like, I don't feel like sitting at my desk and studying, then I can do an activity that I want to do, like take a walk, while also listening to that podcast. My second tip is you can always create 1-minute options for typically longer tasks. Most study activities can be shortened just by doing the 1-minute or 30-second version of it. So instead of reading a chapter out of a book, maybe just read one page or even one paragraph or even one sentence. Instead of reviewing all my flashcards, maybe just review as many flashcards as I can get to in a minute. What's also nice about doing this is a lot of times what happens when you do that 30-second or 1-minute version of the activity, you end up gaining some momentum and you can actually do that activity for longer. But that also doesn't always happen. If you get 2 minutes into an activity and you're like, I'm still not feeling it, give yourself a break that day and try again tomorrow. So once you've acquired a bunch of activities that you could do to study, I also suggest that you organize them. How might you organize this list? I personally organize my study menu in 2 dimensions, first by difficulty level, then by duration. Here's an example of what literally my Korean study menu looks like these days. So this is what I mean. I have 2 levels of organization. First, difficulty level, easy, medium, and hard.
And then I also organize by duration. Next to each activity, I write down about how long that activity takes.
I also want to elaborate a little more on difficulty level. Rather than defining difficulty level by difficulty of the content, I go by how much energy it takes for me to do that activity. So in my easy category, I have things that I could do even on days when I do not feel like studying whatsoever. In my hard category, I have activities that I do when I'm feeling super great, feeling super motivated, and feel like I could take on more of a challenge. And then medium days are kind of my average days, like somewhere in between. These difficulty ratings should be completely specific to you. So for example, for me, having a 30-minute conversation in Korean with a language partner, for some reason, is way easier for me than writing 3 sentences in Korean. I know that doesn't really make sense, but for some reason, as soon as I try to write a sentence in Korean, my overthinking brain kicks in of like, wait, what should I even write about? What grammar pattern should I use? Anyway, my point is that for me, 30 minutes of free talking in Korean is in the easy category. Writing 3 sentences is in the hard category. These are my ratings. You should use your own ratings and be honest to what is easy for you and what is difficult. How long should your study menu be? It's kind of up to you. Remember, you're designing this for yourself. So just like how a restaurateur can decide if their menu is 10 pages long or 1 piece of paper front and back, this is your study menu. So you should just customize this menu to your own tastes, and you're done when it feels like you have enough variety. And just to bring this full circle for a moment, my original study plan, that one that kept failing for me, was to get a textbook and study 1 chapter a day out of that textbook every single day. Well, that's kind of like having a restaurant that only serves 1 item on the menu. And that's like a thing. Like, there are absolutely restaurants that only serve 1 thing. Like, there's a place in Manhattan that literally only serves fries. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I love fries. I love that restaurant. But that's kind of the point, is like, if your study menu happens to only have read a chapter of the textbook as the only option on the menu, that's totally fine, but you need to really love doing that every day. And if you don't, maybe try rounding out your menu with a few more options. So now we've found some activities, we've organized it into a menu. How do you use a study menu?
Well, I think I've said this in passing a few times already, but just to say it again, when you sit down to start your study session, take a look at your menu and choose a few items off the list. Don't overthink it. Just choose a few activities that sound good to you, that you can finish in the time that you put aside for studying that day.
And the main rule is be flexible. You shouldn't feel like you have to stick to what you ordered or even that you have to order on the menu. As long as you're showing up and putting in the time to study, you are accomplishing the goal of showing up and studying. All right, so we talked about what's a study menu, how to make them, how to use them. It is now time to actually do it. So if you would like to incorporate a study menu into your study routine today, your homework is to make a study menu. That's probably kind of obvious, but I specifically suggest that you use your next study session to make your study menu. So like, let's just say you watch my previous video on making time for studying, and you're planning to study for 30 minutes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, then I suggest you start using that 30 minutes to create your study menu. Like, you don't have to create your study menu as pre-work for studying. Self-studying is both self-learning and self-teaching. So creating teaching materials for yourself, like a study menu, is absolutely also studying. So use your study time to create this menu. And also take as long as you need. Like, if you can create your study menu in just one session, that's fantastic. But if you need more time, like if you need to take a few weeks even to create a menu that feels good to you, that's also great. If you are just trying to get started with a study routine, creating your study menu during your scheduled study time will help you establish this routine of studying without needing to actually study yet. Once your study menu feels complete for whatever that means to you, you can then easily transition from making the study menu to using it. All right, my friends, we've done it again. We've reached the end of this video. If you end up making a study menu, definitely comment below to let me know. Or even if you don't make a study menu and you like studying in a totally different way, comment below and let me know that too. I'm always super curious to see other people's systems. And like I said, I love variety, so I'll probably give your method a try. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, where I'm gonna be sharing all sorts of content on self-studying, language learning, and creative projects. That's all for today, so thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!